Does consciousness survive after death? That's one of the many questions we'll be chatting with Pamela Nance about when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you. Pamela Nance has a master's degree in cultural anthropology and archaeology with minor degrees in religion and sociology. She recently retired after a 30-year career in clinical trial research and medical publications in the fields of public health and biostatistical sciences. Pamela first experienced unexplained paranormal and extraterrestrial phenomena in early childhood, followed by an out-of-body experience as a teenager and a near-death experience in her early 30s. For nearly 40 years, Pamela has researched consciousness and investigated the survival of consciousness after death. And as a result of her research, she became a trained healing practitioner, past life regressionist, and hypnotherapist, and a dowser and a shaman. Pamela, you've got all these titles. How are you?
I'm doing great, George. How are you?
My gosh, I'm doing good, too. Thank you for being on the program. This is quite an experience you've gone through in your life, hasn't it?
It has. It's been a long, mystical journey, to say the least. But first, I would just like to thank you for having me as a guest this morning. It is such an honor to be on your show. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And you co-wrote a book with a dear friend of ours, William Henry, called Ascension, which just came out a few months ago.
That's correct. It was released in December, and that was a thrill to be a part of that project and to actually get to meet William and discuss some of the multitude of stories within the book. I would encourage folks to take a look at it. There's some just great accounts of consciousness and ascension, and of course William, is wonderful in what he writes. So
he really is. We're going to talk about a lot of things that have affected your life, Pamela, and your career. But what would you say has been the most profound thing that has happened to you?
The most profound event in my life would definitely be the near-death experience that I had in the early 90s.
Tell us what happened.
That changed me.
What happened?
Well, I was finishing up undergrad school in the spring of 1990, and I was under quite a bit of stress at the time, working double shifts at a gourmet restaurant and going full-time to school. And, of course, in the restaurant business, that time of year, it's graduation, Mother's Day, and at the same time I was studying for final exams, and I'd had a history of a duodenal ulcer, and it, just from all the stress, decided it was going to rear its ugly head during that time. And so I was working a dinner shift on a Friday evening, and I was in extreme pain, and normally I would have Tagamet on hand to control the ulcer, but I'd run out of my prescription, and I was so just trying to power through, drinking milk and waiting on my tables, but I was to the point I was almost doubled over, and I felt a slight pop, and the pain subsided, and, I felt great and continued to work out my shift, not knowing that the pop I felt was actually a vessel bursting in my stomach.
Oh, geez.
So I went for about 36 hours with this bleeding going on and not really realizing it. I thought I had a stomach bug the next day, and just tried to, go about my normal Saturday routine, looking forward to a dinner out that evening with a group of friends at a French restaurant that, I was so excited about going, even though I didn't feel like going out. I didn't want to disappoint my husband or my friends, so went to dinner and ended up having some red wine and duck with a cherry sauce. And when I got home, I became quite sick, and there appeared to be blood, when I became sick, but I tried to just rationalize it away as the red wine and the cherry sauce from the duck, and my husband even commented, yeah, it's probably just what you had for dinner. So I went to bed, and early the next morning, I woke around, daybreak, just extremely thirsty. I felt like I just trekked through a desert. And my husband was getting up to go to a flea market, so I asked him to bring back a soda. I just wanted a big glass of cold soda. And I turned to go into the upstairs bathroom, and that's the last thing I remember. Fortunately, my husband heard me collapse and came upstairs, found me on the floor, not breathing, took me to the bed and began to perform CPR. But at that point, I was long gone. I had left my body and gone to this incredible place of beauty. And you hear folks talk about how loving and beautiful it is on the other side, and it truly is. It's indescribable with human language. But what I found most striking were the colors of the environment that I found myself in. And I can go into much more detail if you would like me to share that with the audience.
And it kind of sounds like that movie, What Dreams May Come, where everything was very colorful and things like that.
Yes. I found myself, I didn't go through the traditional tunnel that you hear about, nor was I greeted by deceased relatives or friends. I just immediately found myself on the top of a mountain range, looking down at this incredibly green valley. And off in the distance was another mountain range with snow-capped mountains. And looking back at the green valley, I saw one tree in the middle of the valley, this giant tree, and it spoke to me as though it was the tree of life. I just felt, this is the tree of life. This is what it's all about. This is where I'm supposed to be. And I immediately found myself under the tree. And that's where things kind of became very different compared to other near-death experiences that you hear about, in that I was surrounded only by animals. There was every animal imagined that you can possibly think of. It was like a scene from Bambi or
the Jungle Book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And what was really cool, the Thursday night before, my 14-year-old Rottweiler had passed away. I was with her, sat up with her until about 2 a.m. when she passed, and she was there, but she was no longer 14. She looked to be about 2 or 3 years old, her vibrant young self, coat very shiny, and she was so happy to see me. Her entire body was wiggling, and she was licking my face, and I, I could feel her. I could feel her head and her body, and I hugged her, and it was just so wonderful to see her again. It was as real as anything could ever be. And all the animals were just singing, and there was just so much love there. It just was truly where I was supposed to be at that moment in time.
Did you know you were passing over?
I didn't think about it in that aspect. I just knew that I had gone to a place where I belonged, that where I was reality. Where I had come from was not. That's about the only way I can explain it. It was just this fulfillment of, this is what it's all about.
What would you say once you came back were the abilities that you had that you didn't have before?
Well, when when I came back, I ended up staying in the hospital for about 5 days, had to be transfused.
It's a long
and
time. Yes.
when my husband brought me home from the hospital on the ride home, it was as though I was seeing things for the first time. And it was spring. Of course, everything was beautiful. I live in the South, and, the azaleas were blooming, and the trees were budding, the dogwoods were flowering, and everything just held such beauty and energy. And I was looking at the neighborhood and my surroundings as though I'd never seen them before. And when I got out of the car and went up onto the front porch, I have a natural area in my yard and a huge oak tree. I could actually see the energy coming from the plants. And I was telling my husband, look, can't you see the life coming from these plants? And I was stopping and touching them and walking over to the tree, and I was trying to get him to understand, what I was talking about. And all he wanted to do was get me inside and get me back to bed. But what I found over the next weeks and months is that my my physiology had changed. I couldn't turn lights on without blowing the light bulbs. If I went to the grocery store and reached for a can on the shelf, arcs of electricity would come from my fingers, and I would get shocked.
Like
I could not
little lightning bolts out of you.
Yeah, yeah. And even when, like, going out for walks in the evening, passing under street lights, they would kind of fizzle and flash out, and when I would pass under, they would come back on. So I felt like this huge surge of energy had occurred in my body that was not there previously.
What was it, Pamela, that made you decide to turn this into a career?
I think just knowing that I had this energy coming from my body, and then I recalled, as a child, having some healing ability with plants and animals, and that occurred, I guess, starting around the age of 7. But backing up a little bit further, I knew from stories that my mother told me that I came from a long line of maternal healers. My bloodline is Native American Cherokee and Spanish Basque, and so I heard stories about my great-great-grandmother, who was full-blooded Cherokee, and great-aunts that were healers, midwives, root doctors, psychics, and the great-great-grandmother had the ability to talk fire from burns, and that was routinely discussed in my home as a child. I loved hearing those stories from my mom, and I found that when I was at about 7, I was able to heal my cat that had been hit by a car, and they expected him to not make it, and we were poor. We didn't have the money to take the cat to a vet, and so my dad made him really comfortable on the screened-in back porch, and I laid with him for several days, and it was over the Thanksgiving holiday, and my mom allowed me to feed him turkey and just would put my hands on him and pray with him and visualize him being well again. And he had a broken pelvis, but he ended up healed. He was able to walk, and so subsequently, I kind of gained this reputation in my home and neighborhood as, a little healer, and worked on plants and in the yard if they weren't doing well. But as a kid, you do these things, but then your ego steps in, and you go to school, and you're exposed to religion and those types of things. And I had forgotten really about those abilities until this happened to me. And then throwing in an out-of-body experience that I had when I was 16 during a tonsillectomy, coming back from that, I had the ability to see the human aura, although I didn't really understand what I was seeing at the time. So these things sort of culminated into my wanting to share this ability more broadly. And I had the fortune to be working at the medical center from which I retired, and they had a great complementary and alternative medicine department. And I worked briefly on a clinical trial with one of the doctors, a female, and she was very open-minded, of course, being in the CAM department. And I shared, many of my stories with her. And she had a colleague in the physics lab there at the medical center and university who was also interested in energy work. And so we did some experiments in the physics lab using plants as intervention and control groups over a several-week period. And I found that I could actually affect their growth in the intervention group. And so they suggested that I become involved in the Healing Touch practitioner program that was offered to the patients in the hospital part of the medical center. And so they had a wonderful program there. It was run by one of the neurologists and obtained my Healing Touch Level 4 certification.
Well, where do you think that power, that authority comes from for you?
Well, I think that it, for me, I would say it's in my DNA, that it's been passed down through this long line of healers that actually it surpasses that maternal bloodline of the Cherokee and Spanish Basque and actually goes back to a prehistoric maternal haplogroup. I had my DNA in one of those programs tested, and it was traced back to the prehistoric K maternal haplogroup, which traces back to Otzi, this like 5,000-year-old mummy that was found in the Alps in 1991. And as it turns out, Otzi had tattoos that marked meridian points that are used in acupuncture. And he also carried herbal medicines and other things that indicated he was of a great importance within his community.
He may have been a shaman, I guess.
Right, a healer and a shaman.
Hold on for a second, Pamela. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and chat more about your experiences. And then, of course, next hour we'll take phone calls. Pamela Nance with us. Her website is her name, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. She's got a number of books out, including Ascension, that came out in December with our friend William Henry. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Noory with you, Pamela Nance with us. Pamela, these experiences that you've gone through, did they enhance your abilities, do you believe? The healing and then the other aspects of the paranormal that you've learned?
I certainly think so. I think that, we all have the ability to raise our consciousness through our vibrational frequency. We all resonate at an atomic level, and through these experiences, I think that, I was changed at an almost atomic level. And that change in my vibrational frequency, I think, has allowed me to make a better connection to this universal consciousness that resonates all around us. And at times it's almost, you know, I don't want to use the word channeling or medium, but it really does, the consciousness comes through me and provides me information. And it's difficult to explain exactly how that happens, but I think you have to be open to it and set your intention in the right way, and things can certainly happen.
You have had a lot of UFO experiences since this has happened as well, haven't you?
I have, and those began in childhood, and just having experiences of seeing craft outside at night, witnessing a silver disc in 1967 with my entire family one summer evening, and having the experience of two humanoid beings that appeared to me in my bedroom when I was 10 years old. I was going, in my bed, preparing to go to sleep, and I felt the presence of someone in my room, and there were two people standing by my bed, dressed in black, a male and a female, and they communicated to me that they were there to balance my karma from a past life of 5,000 years previously. And I was raised in a rural area of western North Carolina, Southern Baptist. I knew nothing about sacred white elephants or karma, which would be indicative, of the Hindu religion. Knew nothing of that, yet this is what they communicated to me. I found myself on board what I assume would be a craft on a table with some procedure being performed at the top of my head. I could not see what was happening, but I felt that they were working in the area around the top of my head. I soon found myself back in my room, quite confused and rather distraught about what had just happened. And when I woke the next morning, my entire head was covered like in a fine red rash from the neck up. My parents rushed me to the doctor. The doctor couldn't explain, what had happened, but clearly I had been exposed to something, and, over the years, colleagues have theorized about what this could potentially be, exposure to something on board the craft. I'm really not sure, but I had a physical manifestation of what happened to me that night. And I do want to say that the area that I grew up in was very energetic, and that nearby two very significant ley lines intersect over a nearby mountain that's about 20 miles away, the Serpent Ley and the Arcadian Ley. And within sacred geometry, that is a very powerful vortex of generating energy. And so this intersection occurred within a close proximity of my home. And in addition, there is what is referred to as the Appalachian feathered serpent. It's an underground body of water, and part of that geostream runs directly under the home where I was raised. And so this intersection of these two powerful ley lines and this underground geostream creating kinetic energy really set that area up to be quite energetic, and I think potentially, attracted possible, alien visitors to that area just because of the energy associated with the property.
You had a chance. Did you meet Stanton Friedman?
I sure did. I met Stanton in 2013. All of these experiences had led me to begin investigating the paranormal in the early 2000s. And so over time, I found that the historic timelines that I had been communicating with through the paranormal investigative methodology, other beings started to come through, not just the historic figures, but figures that appeared to be coming through space and time, not within the astral plane of the earth, because I began to receive communications saying that they weren't human, they were coming through a portal. So I put together a PowerPoint presentation of the paranormal combined with quantum theory and presented that at a conference in Atlanta called DragonCon in 2013. Well, Stanton was there presenting on Roswell, and I recognized him, introduced myself, and invited him to my presentation, and he sat in and was quite impressed with the scientific approach to the paranormal and suggested that I meet Kathleen Martin, a good friend of his, friend and colleague. And Kathleen, of course, is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill.
That's right.
The couple that had, the encounter in the early 1960s.
And Stanton and Kathleen wrote a book about that whole situation.
Yes, they did. And they wrote, co-wrote several books together. And so he was very instrumental in introducing me to Kathleen, who has now become, a dear friend and colleague. So it was wonderful getting to know Stanton.
I'll tell you an interesting story about Stanton. Back in 1971, he was my first radio interview when I was a 21-year-old cub reporter.
Wow.
And so he was my first. Now, get this. Back in May of 2019, he was my live studio station on-stage guest in Columbus. I do live stage shows. He was one of our guests. I was the last person to interview him before he died. So he was my first interview, and I was his last interviewee.
Wow, that's quite phenomenal. Yes, because he passed after he left that conference.
Right after. He died at the airport in Toronto of a heart attack.
Right.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
Now, who's got the Rh negative blood? You?
I do have Rh negative blood, yes.
You're an alien.
Well, some seem to think that. My husband tells me that every day, but no, all kidding aside, that, there is some people that theorize that Rh negative blood is not a mutation, as some refer to it, that it just, pretty much spontaneously occurred within the human genome, I guess, tens of thousands of years ago, if not longer. And it's difficult to explain it, from a scientific point. From the research that I've done, no one has a really good explanation as to why that blood type occurred. There's even some that theorize that the people who have this blood are descended from survivors of Atlantis. I've read those accounts as well.
So as you look at this entire field of the paranormal and the unexplained, where do you think all of this comes from? It's not luck. Is it God-given? What is it?
I think it is creator-given. It's that universal consciousness that comes from the Creator, that is a gift to everyone, not just here on planet Earth, but throughout the universe. And, I think other civilizations, other than our own, are aware of this more so than we are. Those that are, thousands, if not millions of years ahead of us have learned how to use the consciousness in a way that we have yet to discover. But but it's there, and it can be seen in our ancient past. If you look at various religions that have developed over time, consciousness, the study of consciousness is really nothing new. If you look at the Hindu religion, the Buddhist, this, desire to explore who we really are has been around since we've been on the planet. So it is a gift.
What do you think, Pamela, consciousness is?
I think it's that all-knowing body of information that is in what some refer to as the Akashic record. That was Edgar Cayce.
Mm-hmm.
What he tapped into. It's all the information of all time that's there, and we can tap into that. Consciousness localizes itself through our brain, but it's not part of our brain. It's outside of us. It resonates throughout the universe, and scientists are starting to realize this. There's a whole movement, the science of consciousness. PhDs, MDs are on board. It's a fascinating area of study because people are starting to look at near-death experiences and paranormal and ET encounters and all sorts of things that can be validated to a certain degree. So, it's a complicated field, but it's real and it's accessible. You just have to set your intentions and your desire to learn about it and to open yourself to it.
How do you use dowsing?
I use dowsing really to determine the energy on properties.
Okay.
And also to help me answer questions. You can use it as a spiritual tool.
Or a lie detector test, too.
Pardon me?
You could use it as a lie detector test.
Yes, you can. There's a lot of, a lot of neat things that can be accomplished with dowsing. And a great book is Sig Longren's Spiritual Dowsing. That's my little tool book.
I was at a party years ago, Pamela, and we were doing a dowsing as a lie detector test with the little pendulum going up and down and no, across for no and up and down for yes. And there was a guy who didn't believe it. So I said, okay, let's do this. And everybody's at this party, and he's there with his wife. And I'm asking him some questions to kind of tune him up, and he's answering them the right way, and the pendulum's going yes, yes, no, no, just as he was saying in his head. And so then I started asking him some personal questions that got him in trouble with his wife because the pendulums told the truth. I won't get into what I said or what I asked him, but it's uncanny, isn't it?
It really is. It is. And it can be it can be entertaining, but it can be very beneficial as well. I wouldn't encourage folks just to use it, in an entertaining way, although it can be quite interesting and draw a crowd's attention. But it can be used for, great purpose.
A lot of people use it, too, to find things,
Yes.
Individuals who are lost or things like that. That's possible,
right.
Isn't it?
With maps and that type of thing, similar to remote viewing, They use that in conjunction sometimes with remote viewing.
We're going to take some calls when we come back in just a second, Pamela. So of everything you've gone through in your life, what do you enjoy the most of the paranormal?
I really enjoy the communication side of the paranormal.
You do?
Yes.
And in what respect?
Actually, using the transcommunication devices that are available that this consciousness out there, whatever